Everybody.
Very relaxing.
Yeah, excellent. That's what we wanted to achieve. So, James, thank you so much for joining us. This is like our third or fourth, I can't even remember what number webcast we're on. It's fantastic to have you here. I know you're super busy, so this is really great. And like I said, this will be going out to everybody, and I know people are looking forward to listening to what you have to say. The reason why I asked is because you've been coming to like our webcast, and I've always found like what you're saying, and you've alluded to like talking about PTSD a lot and shared resources and stuff. And I've always been quite curious, actually, what is your backstory? And then when we had that phone call, I'm not going to lie, I was just completely like overwhelmed by it, which is why we're here today for our webcast, like the impact of our life journey on us. So I'm not going to say any more. Please tell us.
Thank you very much.
Why you're here.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so I just wanted to say in advance, if there's anything I say that's triggering, hopefully not too triggering, I just wanted to let people know in advance in case there's anything that I say, so that's not in my intention. My experiences, I'm hoping might help some people, because in the past I've heard other people talk about theirs, and at a point in time when I didn't feel comfortable sharing my own issues or difficulties. So seeing other people or hearing other people share their stories and be vulnerable over the years has definitely helped me a lot, and I'd like to try and do something similar. So I do, as you said, Runa, I struggle with PTSD, anxiety and depression. And for many years, I didn't really understand that or know why. I actually grew up in a traumatic domestic violence household. So my mum and dad divorced when I was young, and there's this thing called childhood domestic violence that a lot of people don't really know about, because normally when people talk about domestic violence DV, it's normally about the adults, and the children tend to be sometimes mentioned or sometimes witness it or whatever. So it's not really, focus isn't really on how that affects the children. But actually, there's quite a lot of psychological difficulties that come about from that, and I've done quite a lot of research on that over the years, trying to figure out what was happening to me. So because of that, I did grow up on free school meals, government benefits, which are very topical at the moment with Marcus Rashford and the great stuff that he was doing. So I'm really pleased to see what he did. Also, when I was young, my mum's brother, he passed away from suicide, which is very devastating for family, especially for my mum. So I saw how close to sort of mental health problems and how serious it could be from that angle. And again, I didn't realize how those types of events affected me until later on in life, realizing how close or susceptible people are to that kind of stuff. So I studied hard at school, especially maths, because I really liked that. Went to college, university, worked a lot of part-time jobs to fund that. I met a girl when I was there who I fell in love with, and in the first summer, she had to go home to stay with her parents, and that really hit me hard, and I didn't realize why at the time, but I guess I'd grown so close to her that in that period of being without her, I felt quite isolated and alone, and that seemed to sort of be the trigger for my first sort of mental health breakdown. So in my second year at university, I was really struggling. First year I found really easy, enjoyed it, great time, worked hard. But in my second year, it just started to crumble down, and I couldn't figure out why. It just wasn't working. So I realized I needed to pause and take a year out and go back to university the following year. And I spoke to university about this. There wasn't any sort of mental health available at the time, and we're talking sort of 15, maybe more years ago. So nobody really suggested anything. I just went off, did my working full time to make some money so I could support myself. But really what I was doing was trying to sort of take myself out of the situation, because I really cared about university. I really wanted to do well there, and I couldn't understand what was happening to me. So whilst I was working full time, it coincided with the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks. And I remember seeing the news. I was already very vigilant, hyper vigilant anyway, because of what I'd gone through as a child. So I was always on high alert. If there was any commotion, if there was any arguments, if there was anything aggressive or violent, I'd immediately jump into action. The whole fight or flight thing, I was very much fight. And I needed to stop that situation from happening, because it's scary and dangerous. So when I had the news on and I saw a plane had already hit the building, I thought that was a tragic accident, and I thought how sad, I can't believe this. But whilst probably lots of other people saw the same thing, whilst watching the news, the second one came in, And I was like, this isn't an accident. And then I think I already felt the world wasn't safe because of my childhood. To see something on that scale and to realize how unsafe it, even though it's miles away, how unsafe it was. I think again at the time I didn't really acknowledge that, but I think all these things, and I'll explain some more later, all these things started to sort of have an effect on me. And I finished my year out working, went back to university, really focused. That did me the world of good. Got back on track, graduated with a really good first class degree. But when I came out of university, I didn't even feel confident enough to apply for graduate schemes. So I just didn't feel, I felt out of place. I felt unable to sort of make the most of that opportunity. I ended up getting a job in the London insurance market, which is renowned for being quite a toxic culture, very sort of very unhealthy place to work back then, and still now. There's a lot of news articles in recent years about how they're trying to make that kind of environment dog eat dog, alpha, ultra ruthless, kind of lots of people having beers all day just to get through it, and various other things. It was quite a very sort of ultra masculine, you know, the typical macho world where you kind of had to play that game to sort of stay in it. And this wasn't sort of what I thought I would be doing when I left university. I thought if you worked hard, you were quite bright, you could do quite well in life. And I realized it was more than that. And there's more to it. It's almost like a game that you had to play and not really be yourself. And that, I think, over many years really got to me without realizing at the time. So the girl that I'd been in love with from university, we were getting to the point where we were really struggling. We were living apart, and things were not going well in my job because of this cultural thing that I just said. And also, it again coincided this time with the 2005 7/7 bombings that happened on the road. One of the bombs happened on the road I was working, so at Aldgate, and I could see out of the office window all of the commotion at the station. So that was really triggering for me, being so close to that. And it kind of just changed, probably like a lot of other people who were in London at the time and elsewhere, it just changed again my whole concept of what is safe, what is life. Going to work that morning, listening to sort of music at the time, I think it was James Blunt I was listening to at the time. All the music, the lyrics had one meaning to me at the time. When I listened to exactly the same songs on the way home that day, because everyone had to walk home, all the transport was down, all the songs had a different meaning. It was almost like I'd gone to work in one mindset, thinking optimistic, positive about life. And then I realized how easy it is for this kind of carnage to happen and how close it was. I know this goes on all around the world, and it's not always in our face, but when it's really close, it kind of opens your eyes to it. So again, I felt really unsafe. And I think a lot of my past was building up and I wasn't realizing it. I was struggling to cope. So I actually sort of just left that job and kind of went into a bit of an escapism and tried to train to become a maths teacher. But I think because I like maths, I think it was because it just felt like a way to get out of what was going on. But I don't think it's really what I wanted to do. So it was kind of like almost like a bridge to cope with what was going on. So when I realized that wasn't actually a long-term solution, that wasn't really what I wanted to do, I tried to get back into this environment again, not the same insurance environment. But I was struggling a lot with my mental health and home life, relationships. I was having a lot of sort of outbursts of frustration and anger, and I couldn't understand why they were happening. It was hard to sort of stop them, and I always felt bad afterwards, but I never really knew how to prevent them. So I was reading loads of these like self-help books. There's so much like positive mental attitude, self-help books, and they all say all these great, wonderful things about thinking positive. It didn't help. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out what was going wrong. And then around similar time, my mum got breast cancer as well. So shortly after I left university, first few years of work. So I felt like really overprotective because I think my childhood opened my eyes to unhealthy things to do, like the drama triangle. So persecutor, rescuer, victim. And I think I'd always become like a rescuer and seen a lot of people as victims because of my childhood, trying to protect my mum. So when she got breast cancer, it was really bad. I felt really helpless. I think that was actually towards the end of university, sorry. And when I couldn't get back to her to help her much, I was giving her a lot of books, giving her a lot of like support to help her through it. And she did eventually recover. She had a lot of therapy and a lot of surgery. But it was really destabilizing for me. And one of the reasons I said that is when I was trying to figure out what was going on with my mind, she wanted to sort of not repay materially, but she wanted to show her support for what I was struggling with. So I helped her with her breast cancer, trying to help her get through that. And she helped me with mental health. And she did that I was looking in all these different books, and I came across Ruby Wax's Taming the Mind. So the like New Sane World, I think it was. And as I was reading through it, it was all about neuroplasticity. I started to sort of resonate with a lot of these things, and I thought, hold on a minute, this is what's happening to me, but I couldn't, in the past, I couldn't figure out why. And when I realized, when I looked at it from that kind of like primitive brain, you know, why we do fight or flight and stuff like that and freeze, when I read it in her words, it kind of started to open my eyes to like mental health therapy. And so, so my mum got me that book as a gesture to show her support, which meant a lot to me, because I think one of the problems is always feeling that you can't talk to your family or your friends because it's very stigmatizing. But when someone does something like that, you know that they're not judging you. So that was lovely. And then I started to learn about how the anger was actually like a sort of symptom, and the actual cause was sort of underlying pain or guilt or fear or hurt, all the kind of feelings that I'd bottled up when I was young and I never really spoke about. Because when I was at school, they knew that I'd gone through, like my parents had divorced. They knew I was on free school meals, but no one spoke to you about it. No one sat down with you to see how you felt about it. Are you okay? I'm sure they have that kind of stuff now in schools, which is brilliant, and I'm 100% behind that kind of stuff. But back when I was at school, none of that happened. So I think a lot of these problems could be nipped in the bud early if people learn to talk about how they're feeling, and I never learned to do that. So as I was going through this journey, I realized that I needed to get some help, because I got to this point where I remember now being at home one night, and I was really struggling with what had gone on in my life, and I felt that it had all gone wrong, and I'd never got to where I wanted to get to in life, and I didn't know how to stop the pain. I didn't know how to fix what was going on in my head. So I kind of came to this conclusion. I only had two options left, and one was to sort of end it all and give up and just admit defeat, and sort of technically take my life. And I had hadn't planned it in detail, but I'd had a few ideas of how I would go about doing that. Whether I would have gone through with it or not, there's a different matter. But at that point in time, I did think, right, well, I've only got these two options left. I've tried everything else. And the second option was to reach out for help. And in terms of reaching out for help, I knew I'd have to go to someone who was like a professional, a therapist, and I'd never done that before. So the girlfriend I had at the time, she was really supportive, and she said, I'll come along with you if you want for your first session, to give you that moral support. And by her just giving me that, it's okay to talk to someone professional, to open up and admit that you need help isn't a bad thing, that really helped me. So I did go to my first session. I didn't go with her in the end because it was enough for her to encourage me to take that step. And honestly, that was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, to go and get therapy from a professional psychotherapist. I sat down with her, I told her all my problems, and over many years, this was about 6-7 years ago, over many years, it all came out. I understood what I'd been going through, why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And even though I'm not cured, or I don't still have problems, I do. Every day is a bit of a struggle, sometimes worse than others, depending on circumstances. I started to understand a bit more about why. And like, for example, when things are becoming too much, to sort of take a step back, try and find things that help me to ground myself. And some of those things, for example, are I really like this classical musician called Ludovico Einaudi, an Italian guy, and his music's really peaceful, and you hear it a lot in adverts and TV programs. And it reminds me of when I was at university, when I felt really optimistic about the world and how I was going to, go on and conquer everything. It was obviously delusional at the time because of what I'd gone through. I thought I could just fix everything by doing well at university, getting a good job, but there was obviously more going on in my head at the time. So when I listen to this Ludovico Einaudi, I just put it on and it just calms me. And it's a bit like what happened this morning when Runa, when you did your mindfulness, I was quite nervous this morning. So having that kind of calming effect, it does help a lot. So I love the feeling of mindfulness. I find it hard to do mindfulness myself. So when other people do it, I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. And so in my, what was going on at the time, I was actually struggling quite a lot in a job that I was working in, another quite sort of toxic environment for various reasons, where you weren't really treated as a human at work, and everyone has human problems. So I was struggling quite a bit, and I took a few days off with stress. And because I I admitted that I'd taken time off the stress. It wasn't for a cold. I know a lot of people, and I've done that myself, a lot of people say I'm off work because I've got a cold or flu, when really it's mental health problems. So I said it was stress, and not long after, I kind of lost my job. I was made redundant, so that kind of hit me hard. I'd never been out of work since I was 13. Even when I was doing part-time work, and I basically, I just kind of couldn't handle it anymore. It was almost like a real shock to the system, and I ended up being out of work for a year, trying to sort of sort myself out, as in, some days I couldn't even get up. I used to stay up during the night because I was afraid of going to bed at night. I was sleep during the day. I just found it really hard every single day, but I gradually managed to sort of get myself out of that. Some days were easier than others, and I think what really helped me was Twitter. So I didn't really use Twitter before then, but I wanted to learn about mental health. So even though I had a therapist, I didn't really know what other people were doing. So as I was on Twitter, I was looking at other people's accounts, and I was reading what they were saying, and I was looking at all these, and that's probably how I came across Time to Change, actually, and mine. So when I was on Twitter, I was seeing all these like mental health posts, and it was making me feel more normal. It's making me feel like, hold on a minute, loads of people suffer with this. It's not just me. And I was helping them, and they were helping me, and it felt good. And I built up quite a big following on there. Yeah, that was a really, really supportive way of trying to learn about mental health. And I did a mental health first aid course with Mind during that period of time, which is how I'm at where I am now, in terms of, I joined the company I'm at now a few years after. I've had a couple of jobs since then, and that's why I'm a mental health champion, because of what I've been through. And I came out the other end of that breakdown. That would be probably the last big breakdown I had, and I kind of feel like a different person. So one of the things I wanted to share, there's a few things I want to share. So one is this thing called a kintsugi or kintsukuri. It's actually a Japanese bowl, but I don't know if you can see there, but it's got this gold like joinery. So what it sort of basically means is, you've got something beautiful that has broken, but the fact that it's broken doesn't make it any less beautiful. If anything, it's made it more unique and beautiful in a different way. So these joinery have been done like using sort of gold, like glue and powder. And they actually call it, they say it's the repaired piece of pottery has strong core values, which is used as a metaphor for life. So to not skip struggles, but to embrace it by showing where your character is built. As a philosophy, the breakage is seen as our most vulnerable point in life. The repairs are not disguised, but highlights to signify something that is fully healed and stronger. So what I really like about this metaphor and analogy is that in life, we all have like difficulties that we go through, but actually, if it changes us, and because I'll never be the person I used to be, and I probably don't want to, there's elements of that, which now I'm glad I'm not like that, but then there's also bits of me I miss. So I think I have to accept, and I do, that I'm a different person now, and the stuff that I've been through has kind of made me feel kind of appreciative of the experiences, because it's opened my eyes. It's helped me become more self-aware and understand mental health in a way that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't experienced it. And I think there's a few things that I really wanted to sort of share. There's something called the Black Dog video from the World Health Organization, which when I struggle, I sometimes watch that. When I've got depression, I realize that, again, this happens to people, and sometimes you have to wait it out. And afterwards, it's not like, the worst thing is beating yourself up about feeling bad, I think. So that whole mantra of it's okay to not be okay is really important. And to sort of be kind to yourself and be patient, because that's the one thing I struggle with PTSD. When people are throwing things really last minute and it's really emergency, it's very triggering for me because of what I went through as a child. And so I need some time to sort of take a step back and just do it in my own time, and then I'll do well. But if I have too much pressure in a very intense way quickly, I will freeze now. I used to fight. I used to like really jump into action for many years, but I think since my last breakdown, definitely I can't do that anymore. It just stops me from acting. I can't think straight. I can't focus. I can't concentrate. But if I have a little bit of patience and time, I will get there, and I will catch up. But I think just trying to explain that to people, because sometimes you can feel a bit judged. You can feel like people are judging you for not being able to cope with something or manage something, whereas actually it's just too much in that instant to deal with. But once you've had a bit of time to sort of almost go back into your comfort zone and feel safe, because I think a lot of what I went through when I was younger was it makes you realize things are not safe, so you don't feel safe. So there's this book called The Boy Who Built a Wall Around Himself. It's aimed at children, but it's really good. Like, if I'd read this as a child or had that read to me as a child, it would have been amazing. So basically what it is a child, could be female or male, doesn't have to be male. They build their own kind of protection around themselves, and there's a lot of coping mechanisms and a lot of unhealthy ones as well. And people not hide in a bad way, but they hide behind it because it makes them feel safer. But it actually prevents you from being vulnerable or connecting with people, because you're not being your true self. You're afraid to say, and this is the point I wanted to make about men's mental health. I feel that a lot of men tend not to feel able, and I did as well, to open up about how they feel or their own mental health vulnerabilities or issues or difficulties. And I think that's because we're all taught when we're young, boys don't cry, man up, and all those kind of mantras that isn't helpful. Because actually, if men were able to talk more openly about, and boys would talk more openly about their feelings, and it wasn't seen as like a humiliating thing to do, I think there'd be a lot less like male suicide and like in terms of the statistics, because I think it's not always in men's nature to talk openly about this sort of stuff. Like, people will go down and watch football, or they'll go to the pub and all those kind of things, and I think it is changing, and I think it's brilliant. It's changing, and I really like the Time to Change I'm Fine campaign, where people ask you, are you fine? And I know there's that guy who's under like a big log or whatever. It's like, yeah, I'm fine. If you saw that, they're not fine. But in everyday life, people do just say that to each other. I'm fine, I'm fine. And that whole ask twice to just make sure that they are. But I also think, I'll caveat that, especially from my perspective, if someone's asking you, are you fine? You have to trust them to really open up to them, because what I find quite hurtful and painful is when I do open up to someone and they don't sort of do anything, like they don't empathize, or and when I say they don't empathize, because not everyone knows how to, as in putting themselves in your position or trying to understand what it feels like, rather than making that feeling go away because it's uncomfortable, or, oh, here's a quick fix. Or, I know everyone's doing that because they're trying to be kind and they're doing it for the right reasons, but there's a scene, without trying to spoil anything, there's a scene in the movie Inside Out, which I really love, because it talks about all the human mind, emotions and feelings. And the character Sadness, the little blue one, she empathizes with another character just by listening to them, just by putting herself in that person's shoes. And it helps them, it helps the other person, because they haven't just dismissed how they're feeling. They haven't just trying to trivialize it. They haven't said, here you go, here's something silly to make you feel better. It generally was, I can sort of feel a bit like how you feel right now. And that connection is really powerful. And I think we don't learn all this sort of stuff when we're younger. I certainly didn't. I hope it's changing now, and I hope children these days are being taught this sort of stuff. But I think there's some really important things out there for people to learn about their past, and to try and understand why things keep happening. And I'd love for, one of the things I was going to do for the breakout questions was for people to have a think about, can you think of any catalysts in your life, or any experiences in your life which opened your eyes to mental health, or made people want to become a mental health champion? And the other one was to do with men, and why men, or how we can help more males kind of realize that talking about their own feelings and mental health isn't a weakness, it's actually a strength.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, to be honest, because that, I'm not going to lie, that is a lot to take in, because it feels like, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but just one thing after another, and like I imagine, like, if I was in your shoes, I wonder if I would have just given up, or I don't know, like, I just found it very overwhelming, and I imagined that others would too. And sometimes I wonder, like, when things go in your life, and you're not kind of, I mean, I've certainly experienced this, like, you're not kind of sure of what's going on, like, the little signs coming up, and because we're constantly dismissing them, it snowballs almost to get you to that point of where actually now this is at breakdown point, and I think that could happen to anybody, couldn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly, Bruno. You're spot on. Like one of the analogies I wanted to say, it's not a very nice one because it involves a frog, but the whole thing about boiling a frog, they say if you put a frog in boiling water, it will jump straight out because it knows it's boiling water. If you put a frog in just normal cold, normal temperature water, and you gradually boil that water, it doesn't realize. So over that time, you're kind of enduring all of that problems, pain, whatever, and eventually it just becomes too much. And one of the things I said to my therapist when I first spoke to her about all of this was it felt like I like analogies. I find it easy to explain things in analogies. I'm very visual as well. And with regards to snakes and ladders, that board game, it felt like I kept falling down the snakes. I kept thinking I was getting up the ladders rather than I was falling down the snakes. So it was that constant up and down. And there's a really good saying in Chinese. I can't really say it. I think there's a Japanese version of it as well. That is something to do with Nana Karobi Ya Oki, and it means fall down 7 times, get up 8. And it's that. I think I saw my mum go through so much when I was young, and when she got cancer as well. I think she's such a survivor and a fighter. She'll keep going through no matter what. And I think just having that role model to, okay, get knocked down, get back up again, like that song, get knocked down, get back up again. And it's that just constant pushing through, and things do sometimes get easier, but it is hard. I agree, Rina. Sometimes I just think I can't do this anymore. It's very exhausting. It's really, and that's the other thing my therapist said to me when I first spoke to her about this. She said, sounds really exhausting. I was like, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, I'm going to put the breakout questions that you gave up in a second. But what I do want to kind of like add on, because you talked about the wall and the fact that men find it difficult to speak. But to be honest, I don't know if it's even just a gender thing. I think to describe what you've experienced and actually what people tend to experience, like to articulate that is just something else. Like, I don't know if I would have the words or the language to be able to describe stuff like that. And if you're not doing the tools from the start.
I've really struggled. You're right, Rina. When I was young, I didn't even realise. So I grew up not realising. And I know my mum and my dad the best they could, and they're very loving in their own ways. And my mum's really supportive. But what you go through as a child, it does affect you. And I think I've spoken to her afterwards, and I said, why did we never talk about these things? She's like, it's adult stuff. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. I was like, but I had to go through that as a child. So seeing it, experiencing it, dealing with it, and not talking about it, I don't think it's good. I think if you're going to go through anything traumatic in life, there needs to be that support to be able to process it, talk about it. So what you're saying about articulating it, it's just taken me most of my life to be able to do this. Like it's iterative, but every single time I'll talk about it, it'll get a bit easier, it'll get a bit, you know, like I'm not overly articulate myself, but it's just, I think one of the things is accepting that it's happened, and the other thing is being honest and open and vulnerable about it. And I think when you start doing that, things do get a bit easier, because I think everyone's always, and I was like this all the time, I still am to some degree, and I'm sure a lot of people are always worried about what people will think, how they might view or judge. But actually, sometimes you have to say what it is, and it's up to other people how they accept it. But you do feel better. I feel better even now just getting it out and saying it. So it is hard, but everyone has their own stories, I guess.
Yeah, and it is quite contentious. I mean, in this day and age, I have to say, like, this is something that I've been experiencing. Like, how do I articulate what I've been feeling? Because with all the BLM stuff, and as a person of color, but not feeling like it's affected me, but suddenly I feel like I'm being pulled out, and like, am I right in saying this, or is this making sense, or I'm getting confused by what other people are saying? So actually, social media is the worst, because I agree and disagree with everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's for want of a better word, it's nuts. And you know, like the way that you were able to articulate, I don't know if I could, to be honest. I mean, I'm going to attempt it in next week's webcast, but it's really hard to articulate. Like, I don't know. I mean, I quite like the idea of being that I am that boy in the wall, and I kind of like my wall up. It's really bad to say, isn't it?
You mean? I will also, like, sometimes it depends who I'm around and who I'm with. Like, sometimes I'll have my wall up big time, and I find it really hard to trust people for my safety because of what's happened in my life. But with what you're saying about the BLM, and I think what I've learned is to say how you feel, and to own and say it's okay to feel like whatever you feel, it's not wrong. Whatever you say, I feel like this, I feel like that. That's probably the easiest starting point, because forgetting what other people think, it's not for them to judge. Like, it doesn't matter if they're judging or not. It's if you feel a certain way, say you feel a certain way. And I remember saying to my therapist that all these other people have experienced this. Like, what am I worried about? Why am I? And she's like, trauma's trauma. Everyone experiences trauma. It's relative. Like, whatever someone's gone through, it's going to, them. Our minds are the way they are. Like, I think I've said to you before in the past, the soldier brain. So everyone understands PTSD is associated with soldiers going to war, horrible, and emergency services and things like that. It's natural for what they go through. But they've done studies on the brains of soldiers who have gone to war and do have PTSD, and the brains of children who've gone through all sorts of trauma, different types of trauma. And they've seen on brain scans very similar effects. Obviously, the child's brain is a lot more fragile, more developing. You know, it does a lot of harm. But when people talk about PTSD, everyone accepts it for soldiers, military, emergency services, but they don't always think about how it affects children. And that's in all types of trauma. And it is, you know, everyone's gone through different types of trauma. And it's true, it's how it feels to you, Runa. So whatever you're experiencing and whatever you're hearing with BLM and all the Black Lives Matter stuff, there's nothing right or wrong. If you feel a certain way, I think it's good to say that. And that's what I've learned. I couldn't do this in the past. A few years ago, I could not talk about what I've just said.
No, thank you. To be honest, I was toying with my next week's like webcast around the BLM thing. Should I do it? Should I not? Should I just chicken out and try to find a guest speaker, or should I just lead it based on like what I'm thinking? And I think actually from what you're saying, I'm going to do it. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll get my people if I'm joking. But yeah, so basically I'm going to put your questions up, right, if I can find my share screen, because I think they are really worth discussing, to be fair. Can people see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just put it on slideshow mode. Right, okay. So I think we don't need to go into breakout rooms per se, but this is obviously open to the room. But these are the questions that James posed. Can you think of any catalysts that may have helped you view mental health in a different way, or that contributed to you becoming an active champion? And B, typically, men tend to suffer in silence instead of reaching out for help. How do you think we could help encourage more males to talk openly about their feelings and their own mental health? So this obviously goes to the room. So that's Ian and Kat, if you're around.
Yep.
I'm around.
So what do you think? We'll go with question A first.
Oh, okay, we're going. I mean, first of all, James, that was absolutely spot on, and thanks for sharing. I think pretty much consistently throughout your talk there, I was kind of nodding along in agreement, and so much of that resonated with me personally. I think it's always really interesting as well to see things through a male lens when it comes to mental health, because, you know, as you alluded to, it is more taboo in amongst men. It's just the way it is. And I think the statistics, we all know, men are 3 times more likely to take their life, reflects exactly that. So more Jameses in the world would be a great thing. People opening up and talking about this. And, you know, one of the things that really did resonate was it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with things, to understand things. And it's a process, and it's not a process that clicks overnight. And it takes years and years of reading, which is another thing that I could relate to, because literature really helped me. I remember, it's interesting you talked about the Black Dog as well. One of the first books I read on this was Sally Brampton, Shoot the Damn Dog. Obviously the Black Dog comes from Winston Churchill, suffered with depression, etc., etc. And I remember, I think it was either at the start of her book or the start of one of Matt Haig's books. You might be familiar with Matt Haig as well. They just listed a number of people that had suffered from depression. And I just remember reading these names and thinking, bloody hell, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. There was that feeling of kind of solidarity that you get from it. And I suppose that's the kind of feelings that you got from Twitter as well, and the communication, the openness. But I'm going on a bit of a tangent here rather than answering the question, which I'm going to try and do. So in answer to the first question, in terms of a catalyst, again, I think you spoke about this, James, but external events in the world that you perhaps just assume that shouldn't affect you because we're all going through them together, and some people aren't as affected as yourself. shouldn't be taken for granted. And I think, you know, you spoke about 9/11 and some of the other terrorist attacks. I can remember specifically more recently, the Borough Market attack having a real effect on me, and not being able to compute and comprehend as to what was going on at the time. And now with the benefit of hindsight, looking back and being able to point to that and say, do you know what? There are so many external factors out there in the world that have a huge impact that we absorb. And that's another reason I loved your frog analogy, which is the first time I'd heard that, because it's the slow burn, isn't it? Quite literally. You know, we don't realize, and then these things build up, and before you know it, as typical men, a lot of the time, we haven't expressed those in a healthy way, and they come out in very unhealthy ways. So yeah, definitely as a kind of catalyst, external factors, but also I think seeking out literature and other people who have been through the same thing. I don't know if you find this as well, but I think often when you speak to someone that's experienced kind of clinical depression, if you like, there's almost something that doesn't need to be said. There's just a kind of mutual understanding, and that for me is such a big thing. And it's difficult because, you know, the flip side is when you speak to someone that maybe hasn't experienced that, it takes a little bit more work, a little bit more time, and there has to be sympathy and understanding on both sides. But again, answering that question, I think one of the things, obviously I'm not a champion, but maybe if I could flip that question and say, why am I working in mental health or working for Time to Change? One of the things is basically coming to terms with things over a long period of time and speaking to other people, and that understanding that other people have been through exactly the same thing. And there's quite a lot of you in this boat, and it's not a small boat, it's a huge ship. And you're kind of all in it together. So that's my kind of take on the first question. I could go into the second one, but I'm conscious that Kat's here and I want to give her a chance to speak as well.
Go for it, Kat.
I think mine would take a whole guest speaker thing. My story and why I ended up being a champion. Probably like incidents that could be or are a catalyst would be, to summarize them, being adopted into as a mixed race person, being adopted into an all-white family from pretty much from birth, I think about 18 months. So growing up in that situation and feeling like I didn't belong in the family. And then, there's so many things, as for everybody, but sexual abuse. My adopted dad was an alcoholic who smoked 60 cigarettes a day. Eventually that killed him. Finding my birth mother probably about 10, 15 years ago now, I can't think. Getting in touch with her, and then when I met her at the time, her saying to me, I can't do this, it's too much, I can't deal with the guilt. If you ever contact me again, I'll end up doing something stupid. Finding my birth father 2 years after that, and then 2 years ago next week he died. So yeah, that was all pretty traumatic. I'm also gay. I've been my relationship before this one, the person that I was with transitioned from female to male, and although I did absolutely everything I could to help him go through that, including introducing him to some of my other trans friends, etc., it kind of took away from my identity as a lesbian. So, and it was so hard. His daughter that lived with us also found it hard. She was 12, I think, when the two of them moved in with me. She couldn't handle it, and 5 times tried to take her own life with overdoses of painkillers. Hello, dog. And so yeah, just thing after thing after thing. It's yeah, all very, very traumatic. I've self-harmed as well, probably since I was 12. So yeah, there's been a lot of really like significant moments when you listen, talk to other people and they talk about, when you say to them, you know, I suffer from clinical mental health problems, clinical depression. It also runs in my family. Everybody in my birth family, as I've now found out, everybody suffers from depression. And when I went to my GP about it years ago, he said it's not a matter, it was never a matter of if, it was always a matter of when you would suddenly realize that this would affect you, because it's not hereditary, but perhaps genetic. I've not really looked into how depression runs through families and why. I'd be interested, if anybody's done any research on it or has any stats, I'd be interested to find out more about that. But so yeah, I think having been through all that, I years ago set up an adoption group for adopted adults and young people, and listened to some of those stories, and it really affected me in a good and a bad way. I was so glad that I'd set the group up, because there just wasn't anything in North London for adopted adults and young people. But yeah, but then hearing some of the stories of what people have been through and the way that they came into this world through rape or incest, etc., really kind of pointed me in a direction of, I want to do something, I want to help people. And I'm a very people-oriented person. So yeah, so when I started at the company that I work for, which is Hoxby, and they asked me to be the mental health and time to change champion, I was absolutely, didn't think twice about it. And yeah, so I was talking to Ian, we had a long conversation the other day, over an hour, and then just telling him all about what we do at Hoxby and the amazing opportunity I've had to put in place some mental health safeguards, etc., run activities and do everything else. So it's helped me and it's helped other people. The only thing that I think I struggle with is perhaps self-guarding myself, because Hoxby is all run remotely in 43 different countries across the world. We're all freelancers, but we all work on team projects together. So you don't see anybody face to face. And so doing a monthly mental health meetup and having people just bare themselves and their emotions and everything, I found that really difficult to walk away from that, and not being able to hug someone when they're in floods of tears, because they can't cope, and they, especially through the whole COVID thing, obviously a lot of people have found it really difficult. So in hosting these meetings, I found it hard to protect myself, and kind of, it's not enough just to go, there, it will be okay. You can't, it feels like you can't do enough. You can give people resources to go and read stuff or watch videos or join other groups, etc., but you as a person can't do anything. And I find that really frustrating, that I can't change their situation or change their life. And if they don't, if they're not able to access resources, I mean, one woman I spoke to said that she'd been to her GP and there are no counselling services in her area. She'd have to travel. But one of her issues is that she has a fear of travelling. She thinks if she goes out in the car, she's going to have an accident. So yeah, I find it really hard to help people in the way that I want to. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Can I just say, Kat, that, I've found this quite a lot, actually, just like over the years, that, when you're caring and you've experienced so much adversity, I've noticed that, and people who experience adversity, to go back to that boy with the wall thing, build that wall. But when other people share their stories, it's almost like their story pulls you out of that wall. And I imagine something like that happened to you during that time, and you feel like you just want to be able to change their whole experience. And maybe it's even feeding into what you were saying, James, that you became that rescuer. But the reality is that sometimes people don't need you to do that. The fact that you were there to give people the space, to give people the encouragement to go and access resources, or to even acknowledge in themselves that what they're feeling is valid and that there is something that they can do about it. It's not that doesn't need to define them. And just being there is the most powerful thing you can do. Because the reality is you can't live their life for them. You can't experience for them. You can't change anything for them, and you can't wrap them in cotton wool. Life is such a donkey of a teacher. You know what I mean? Like, it will just throw stuff at you, and it's like a psycho, in the in-betweeners, the psychopath teacher. I feel like the life is a psychopath teacher, and all you can do is provide that space. The fact that you're doing this, that you're a champion, that you're raising that awareness, let me tell you, it might not even come to you, you might not even hear it, but there's so much stuff going on for people like you. I'm not even articulating this well, but you are going to end up saving people's lives. You might not ever hear of it, but you are going to, and you need to acknowledge that rather than push yourself or pressurize yourself that you should be doing more.
Yeah, I think it was more safeguarding myself. I think Ian mentioned the other day about some resilience training, and I think if I'm seeing that the right way in what it's going to provide, but yeah, it's more about protecting myself. I tend to take on other people's emotions quite a lot. So if someone's crying, I'm going to cry, and if someone's laughing, then I would laugh with them. It's more that kind of thing, of not feeling like I haven't helped them, but feeling like, yes, I've done all that I can, but actually when I walk away from that, my depression is then what I'm left with. And holding the meetings as well, I feel like I shouldn't be bringing my own troubles to the party, although obviously that's what it's for, and I know I can do that, and that it would be accepted, and etc, etc. But I feel like I've opened up this meeting for everybody else to come in and say, oh, I've got my child's going mad with the homeschooling, I can't cope, my husband's taken over my workspace, I can't work, I can't see my parents, and this, that and the other, and I feel like I'm allowing them to do all this, or giving them the space to do all this, but actually I can't now go, yeah, I wanted to talk. So
go on, go for it, Jane.
Story's amazing. I think you should be a guest speaker. I think you should share this with people, because I think.
Oh, don't worry, I'll be making contact later.
Yeah.
Incredible, and I think a lot of people could really learn, like, from your experience. So I think you are really resilient, even if it affects you the way it does, which obviously it naturally will do. And I forgot to say earlier, when I was going through therapy, I didn't go through NHS. I just thought I could afford to go through private, and I didn't want to wait for lots of NHS help. And the therapist told me that they all get their own support from other therapists. So if someone's going through a difficult situation as a therapist, they're going to feel the way you're saying. So they then will go get that support. I just wanted to quickly say before we wrap up, earlier, there's this really good, I'll send these links later, Aruna, but there's this really good TED talk from Dr. Jerry Puglia about burnout and PTSD, and how about people through their life, that burnout does have the same mental effect as PTSD. So that's kind of what we were saying about the frog analogy. And there's also this really good, you reminded me, Kat, about the charities and the work that you do. There's a really good charity in London called Free Your Mind. There's not many in the UK, but it's called Free Your Mind, and I'll send a link later. And they're a childhood domestic violence charity in London who support kids who've gone through like domestic violence. And I think those types of charities, there's not enough out there to help them. So they do some great stuff. I just wanted to say that you reminded me on the charity front, Kat.
Can I just, sorry to, because I think we've got an hour, right? So we're 1 minute over, so
yes.
I'm conscious. Sorry, guys. Just to take a leaf out of James's book, because I also love a metaphor and I'm very visual. Kat, it's about the oxygen mask, right? So when you get on the plane and they go before you help someone else. And my Zoom has stopped.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. Yeah. There you go.
I don't know if you guys can hear
I
me.
can hear you, Ian. Don't worry about the video.
Oh, you're back.
Okay, I'm back. My connection is unstable. Thank you, Zoom. Yeah, I don't know where I got to there, but fitting your own oxygen mask before you help someone else, I think is imperative. But yourself and James as champions are an absolute credit to your organisations. And to Runa's point, you may not realise that yet, but your very presence is huge. And speaking personally, I didn't have someone like you there. I absolutely wish I did. It was only afterwards that I'd experienced things and gone through the lows that I could find someone that was anything remotely like as supportive as you guys. So you're a credit to what you do in your organisations and to yourselves, to be honest.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, before we kind of wrap up, yeah, just to kind of second what Ian's saying, that, you know, like, well, he said it, that you guys are amazing, and champions across the board are amazing, like, because without you, people won't have the space to open up, people won't have the space to be able to kind of check out what's going on, because when you're in that pit, it's so chaotic, you can't make wood for trees. So to have people like, you're heroes, I always say this, but you're heroes. And yeah, I could go on forever, but I'm sure you haven't got time to kind of say, so I hope that lands on you. And I hope people find this webcast useful. Thank you everybody for your contributions today and for joining us. James, thank you so much for coming over and sharing your story. Kat, don't worry, I will be in touch because you just put that out there, I'm gonna. But yeah, just a massive thank you. And I feel like I'm taking a lot away today and a lot to digest, and I'm pretty sure I get the impression that you guys are too. So thank you. We're gonna have a webcast next week. I'll send details, but I'll be leading on it, and it will be about the experiences around the Black Lives Matter thing and how it's impacting on us. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. And I will send the links that James sends and the recording of this next week sometime too. So thank you all. Stay safe, look after yourself, treat yourself the love and care that you deserve because you're heroes.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next week.
Take
See
care.
you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.